Wow.
What's up?
I just bought and financed a car through Carvana in minutes.
You? The person who agonized 4 weeks over whether to paint your walls eggshell or off-white bought and financed a car in minutes?
They made it easy. Transparent terms, customizable down and monthly. Didn't even have to do any paperwork.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Hey, have you checked out that spreadsheet I sent you for our dinner options?
Finance your car with Carvana and experience total control. Financing subject to credit approval.
Yeah, sure thing.
Hey, you sold that car yet?
Yeah, sold it to Carvana.
Oh, I thought you were selling to that guy.
The guy who wanted to pay me in foreign currency, no interest, over 36 months? Yeah, no. Carvana gave me an offer in minutes, picked it up, and paid me on the spot. It was so convenient.
Just like that.
Yeah?
No hassle.
None.
That is super convenient.
Sell your car to Carvana and swap hassle for convenience. Pickup fees may apply.
It's January 8th, 1297, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
Hundreds of years before there was a casino, centuries before there were any tax advantages, Monaco still had a rock with a castle on it. And it was that was seized today in history in 1297 by François Grimaldi, whose descendants eventually became the royal family who still preside over Monaco. And therefore, although he wouldn't have known it at the time, this was, in a way, the day the foundations were laid for the World Music Awards.
Yeah, so according to legend, it was a cold winter evening when two brothers Lanfranco, also known as François, and Ranieri, Grimaldi, executed what was a really brutal plan to occupy the almost impregnable rocky outcrop in revenge against those in power in Genoa. And the adventure really resembles an out-of-control student joke because, with just a few henchmen, according to legend, the brothers dressed up as Franciscan monks and went in a rickety boat, supposedly as castaways, to look for a place to stay in the port of Monaco. And it was said to have been drizzling that night when the monks reported to the gate that provides access to the rock. And the unsuspecting night watch kind of was like, yeah, come in because you're clergy. But once they arrived at the fort, the monks then threw off their cloaks and...
The Captain Blood technique.
Yeah, and stabbed all the soldiers.
Aha! It was a robe all along. That's all it was. Look, yeah. I'm evil underneath.
Right, and opened up the gates to the fortress to let their henchmen in, and thus began the Grimaldi family's 700 years of control of the rock.
But, I mean, this is a man, the inhabitants of Monaco, they call themselves Monegasques. They consider this man their hero, their founding father. Their coat of arms is two monks holding swords, which seems quite heroic until you know the story. They're actually soldiers in disguise about to sneak in and kill everyone. I mean, no wonder it became a tax haven. But there is actually a lot of confusion around this story to the point where the Italian Treccani Encyclopedia suggests that François Grimaldi never did this, was never involved in this. They suggest that the historical François Grimaldi was actually being a pirate in the Eastern Mediterranean at this point, and that the whole story is based on something that he did 9 years later.
Regardless of whether he was dressed as a monk or not, the point that you made that he was a pirate later and reported to be so is kind of, it seems to me, the more relevant issue, isn't it? This is an act of piracy. That is what's extraordinary about it, because it's not just that the act is celebrated, the friar's costume and all that. It's the fact that, as I said up top, his descendants are still the reigning monarchy in Monaco, and actually are the longest reigning monarchy anywhere in Europe, which says lots of interesting things, doesn't it? It reminds us that monarchies only ever achieve power in the first place, ultimately because they had the strength to take territory, which is what happened here, just not on horseback in a battle. And also, kind of how ridiculous it is. I mean, it's self-evident, you know, when you see it like this, spelt out like this, but because the Monegasque royal family is continuous but only goes back to 1297, you can look at it and say, right, 800 years ago, a bloke rode in, took control of the castle, and now people say his descendants were chosen by God. That's what happened, yeah.
It's worth kind of going back in time to talk about like the sort of prehistory of the region and how we got to this moment, because the principality really has been occupied on and off since the Paleolithic. Like, people have lived in this area for ages and ages, but it's not until fairly recently, around 500 BC, that we've see the first written down name for Monaco, which was Monoikos. And over the next few centuries, Monoikos grew into being a really important and useful stopping off point. Then after the fall of the Roman Empire several centuries later, activity all along the Mediterranean coasts really started to diminish. Around the 12th century, the region around the principality was put back under direct control of the Genoese by the Holy Roman Emperor of the day, Frederick I.
And it's worth saying, like, whatever the nationality of the people who wanted to be there, you know, French, Italian, Greek, whatever, the reason they wanted Monaco, the reason they always wanted Monaco was because of the rock. It's because of the geographic feature that allows you to look over the Mediterranean, which is obviously useful in any kind of battle or planning or defence strategy.
Yeah, in fact, to the point where the Rock of Monaco is sometimes used as kind of a shorthand for Monaco itself. That held strategic significance, but the actual town around it didn't really hold significance to anyone. The ancient people of the area were called Ligurians, but we know barely anything about them. We don't even know what their language was. And so, yeah, in 1197, the Holy Roman Empire assigned control of Monaco, but specifically the rock, that was the only bit people were really interested in, to the Republic of Genoa. This was a time when, you know, before, this is way, way, way before the unification of Italy. So all of the Italian city-states were kind of independent polities, often at war with one another, and Genoa was one of these. It was very wealthy. It had a huge port. It was a commercial hub for the whole of Europe. I think we talked about it in the Black Death episode. It's where the Black Death came from. Probably not their favourite claim to fame.
Welcome to Genoa, where the Black Death came from. Population 0.2, but we're working on it.
I mean,
and some rats.
The Grimaldi family, for a long time, had been one of the premier families of Genoa, and Francois had been born into this lineage. The problem is that when he had reached adulthood, his family were on the outs at this point, and this was due to a very long, prolonged conflict between the aristocracy of the area. It was the rivalry of the Guelphs and the Ghibelline, and that was a division between the Guelphs, who were supporters of the Pope that at that time headed the Papal State, so he was like actually in control of land as well as just being a religious leader, and the Ghibelline, who upheld the authority of the Holy Roman Empire. Of course, it was the Holy Roman Empire that had given Genoa Monaco. So if you don't believe in the authority of the Holy Roman Empire, you do kind of come away with the sense, well, there's this big rock here with a fortress on top that's right for the taking.
Yeah, although that sounds like it was about religion, and it wasn't. I get the sense like so many of these things, really, this had become so deep-rooted. This is sort of Montague Capulet situation, basically, right? Where people are brought up to either be Guelph or Ghibelline, and they'd kind of forgotten why they hate each other. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, well, these guys have Monaco, so we need Monaco, and we hate them.
Yeah, and it went on for so long. It went on for like 200 years. It didn't actually end until the Black Death, when people just started dying so much they couldn't care about this anymore.
Yeah, and part of the motivation of what pushed the Grimaldis into action is thought to have been the fact that the family suffered periods of exile from Genoa, given the Ghibelline domination of the area. And so basically they were feeling agitated to do something about this. And then after they took the rock through circumstances that are a little bit hazy, as we say,
may have involved a hood.
Conflict with Genoa continued for many, many years. But Charles I of Monaco, who ruled the rock from 1331 to 1357.
Whose name in local language, by the way, is Carlo.
Yeah, right.
FYI, might want to know where the casino came from.
Yeah, it's going somewhere,
He was able to extend the principality's territory pretty widely during his tenure, not least because he was a skilled sailor. And again, this was a really excellent place if you wanted to try to do domination that was sea-based to undertake your
Napoleon
conquest.
said famously. I want to do domination that is sea-based. I mean, throughout the 14th century, it was captured and retaken multiple times. During the Napoleonic Wars, in fact, it belonged to the French, and all the Grimaldis were thrown in prison. But playing the long game, the Grimaldis ultimately became the monarchy. And what's interesting is you talk about it being larger, but it actually got a lot smaller before it became the Monaco that we know now. In 1848, it lost 90% of its landmass when it got independence. And it is
just one Grimaldi standing on the cliff edge.
Basically. And actually, extraordinarily, at that time was the world's poorest country. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it, when you think of the associations with wealth that you immediately associate with Monte Carlo now. But it was the casino opening in 1865, only 20 years later after that, named after King Carlos, a different Carlo, obviously, by that point, that the fortunes of the state began to turn, and it became this country that was tiny, smaller than New York's Central Park, but with a massive concentration of wealth.
Yeah, to make the principality more appealing to the wealthy, they took the risk of abolishing taxes altogether. But this wasn't actually a huge risk because the native population were so poor.
It's funny in a way that there is this lingering idea that a curse has hovered over this family, considering, as we're saying, it has been in power for so incredibly long, and the things that tend to go wrong in their lives tend to be relatively minor, with the exception of perhaps, death by car crash in the case of
see our episode on Princess Grace.
But I think the origin of that story, if you attribute it to this moment, the idea that God was displeased with the idea of Grimaldis having dressed as monks and then done something violent, it doesn't seem to align with that simple fact that they've been in charge for so incredibly long. There are other myths that suggest that a curse was put on the family rather more recently, after a witch.
I love your technique here, Arian. Straw man. Build it up, knock it down. No one mentioned a curse apart from you.
Yeah, my favourite part is how you mentioned a curse, no one else brought it up, and then in the end you're like, yeah, but it's funny how rumours about this curse continue.
to go on about this. Okay,
you're like, Princess Grace killed by an angry monk ghost, ?
Tomorrow.
Gold and silver plates, men's hats, ladies' ribbons, horses and carriages, and also servants.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/retrospectors.
Hi, I'm Grace, host of Red Rum True Crime Podcast. These cases focus on the true victims of crime. Why not jump in at episode 114, the tragic murder of Jasmine and Aaliyah? The main suspect in this case gave an extremely bizarre interview to a number of press reporters whilst he was drunk and reportedly high. He speaks about an awful lot on camera and has this completely inappropriate laughing and chuckling response when talking about the case. He may even have thought he was gonna get away with the double murder he'd been accused of, but what he didn't know was that 2 undercover officers were on their way to catch him out, and he easily and willingly took the bait. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Red Rum True Crime. That's Red Rum, murder backwards, REDRUM True Crime.